Here's a question for you. Is it acceptable for an American studio to make a video game about medieval Japan? Well, it depends who you ask. A normal person would say, of course, and go back to enjoying Ghost of Tsushima. But there are critics, if you can call them that, who love to find social controversies where none exist. According to them, Americans can't make a game set in feudal Japan because they would misrepresent the country's culture, aesthetic, and history. In fact, that's what a handful of critics are saying about Ghost of Tsushima, a game about 13th century Japan by American developer Sucker Punch Productions. These critics are going so far as to accuse the game of featuring imperialism, having a racist depiction of samurais, and even promoting ties to the alt-right. Naturally, I had to respond by saying, Ghost of Tsushima is not racist. Ghost of Tsushima is an action game set in the late 1200s in Japan, specifically Tsushima Island. You play as the fictional samurai Jin Sakai, who is trying to defend Tsushima from invading Mongolian forces while rescuing his uncle, Lord Shimura, from the clutches of the Big Bad, Khotun Khan. Without delving too deep into spoiler territory, Ghost of Tsushima's story is what you'd expect from your typical action game. There's sacrifice, betrayal, and of course, plenty of violence. Ghost of Tsushima is clearly inspired by Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa, who is known for his samurai films over a more than 5-decade career. The game features Japanese voice acting that even Japanese fans admit is accurately done. The developers consulted a sword-fighting master to make sure the combat in the game was rooted in history. In fact, while the game is based on a real Mongolian invasion of Tsushima in 1274, the developers opted to not include any real historical figures from the experience after those who are more culturally aware, whatever that means, said to do so might be seen as insensitive. Clearly, Sucker Punch went to great lengths to not only make a great game, but to make sure it was respectfully honoring the culture in which it is set. However, none of those steps stopped the woke brigade from still finding ways to be offended. The drama started when digitally downloaded snuck ideology into their official review, comparing the American story of The Last of Us Part 2 of all games to Sucker Punch's Japanese tale. The article reads, as much as I had issues with The Last of Us 2's narrative, it was an American story told by Americans, and it had a thematic and tonal resonance as such. It was consistent and uncompromised. Ghost of Tsushima, by contrast, is a wild misfire with every narrative element it attempts, and it boils down to this. Sucker Punch decided to do a historical epic inspired by Kurosawa and produce something that fails as both history and as a pastiche of Kurosawa. Apparently, it's a sin for Americans to even attempt to create a game set in another culture because they can't do it justice. I don't buy that. The bizarre hot takes continued with Dia Lucina writing for Paste that Ghost of Tsushima features a hokey, arguably racist approach to samurai aesthetic, features imperialist ideology, and is a AAA Orientalist spectacle. None of these claims have any merit. Nothing about Ghost of Tsushima's samurai aesthetic is racist. The game's historically based depiction of invading Mongols and Japanese people defending their homeland is not a reflection of an imperialist ideology among the developers. And to call the game an Orientalist spectacle is to downplay the work Sucker Punch did to make the game reflect the feel of 13th century Japan. Probably the worst of all is Polygon's take on the game. Kazuma Hashimoto, who I assume is Japanese, wrote a 2,500-word tirade about the game. Honestly, most of the piece is a word salad of poorly argued thoughts, but one egregious part of the article compares the game's representation of samurai to the alt-right.
Tradition, courage, honor, they are what make us.
Seems like a pretty standard warrior pep talk, right? Not so fast. Referring to Lord Shimura, Hashimoto writes, he rallies his men with this reminder of what comprises the belief of the samurai. They will die for their country, they will die for their people, but doing so will bring them honor. And honor, tradition, and courage, above all else, are what make the samurai. Except that wasn't always the belief, it wasn't what Kurosawa bought whole cloth, and none of the message can be untangled from how center and alt-right politicians in modern Japan talk about the code today. That's right. A games writer compared Ghost of Tsushima's depiction of the samurai code of honor to the alt-right, a fringe political group that believes whites are superior to all other races and should establish their own ethno-state. Let me repeat that. The article argues that the code by which the samurai operated is irrefutably fused to alt-right Japanese politicians who apparently want to eradicate themselves and their people and turn Japan into an all-white paradise. And what evidence do they have of this outrageous claim? Apparently, a Final Fantasy artist was commissioned to depict a right-wing politician as a samurai, which I guess means the image of the samurai is forever tainted and associated with racism? Huh. The article goes on to imply Sucker Punch romanticizes its nationalist depiction of samurai, showing them as honorable heroes instead of violent landlords. The game doesn't do enough to explore the conflict between class systems or the politics of feudal Japan, and for that, the game apparently comes off flat. The problem with these arguments is that Ghost of Tsushima is a video game, not a serious depiction of 13th century Japan. Ghost of Tsushima features gorgeous autumn trees and sprawling fields of wheat that play on the aesthetic of medieval Japan rather than accurately depict what it truly looked like. The same can be said for its depiction of samurai as well. If you want a history lesson, open a book, but don't blast a developer for not making their cool samurai game an in-depth examination of class systems and other political nuances of the time. But hey, I'm just another American, right? What do I know? Let's turn to the Japanese and see what they think. Well, as it turns out, they love the game. Ghost of Tsushima is getting nothing but praise from Japanese audiences who not only apparently love the gameplay, but believe Sucker Punch respectfully depicted feudal Japan. Imagine that. The Japanese people American critics are so eager to defend are so offended by Ghost of Tsushima that it's going out of stock in Japanese stores. I think this series of tweets from Japanese video game developer Kenji Iguchi says it best. Seriously, we don't care about proper portrayals when we ourselves create games based on battles in Japanese history where samurais fire laser beams and you attack giant enemy crabs' weak points for massive damage. Well said.
Genji 2 is an action game which is based on Japanese history. So here's this giant enemy crab.
When From Software, a Japanese company, made a game based on medieval European folklore with Dark Souls, no one complained those games didn't properly examine the oppressive class systems of Europe or question the chivalry of knights. Instead, we celebrated the fact that a foreign country would take an interest in a culture not their own and depict it as they saw fit. Can't we celebrate Sucker Punch for doing the same thing? Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to my channel. I plan to make plenty more. Leave a comment below. I'm eager to see what you all think. Or you can follow me on Twitter @Scrivenaut. I'd love to talk to you there. Until next time, honor, tradition, and courage. Wait, is that racist?